According to Frank Warren, who has a very close relationship with the WBO, so I've got no reason to doubt him in this instance. But according to Mr. Warren, Joe Joyce is now the mandatory challenger for the Joshua Usyk winner. And, we all expected this to happen anyway, because for the longest time it was supposed to be Joyce versus Usyk in a final eliminator. Now it's going to be, I guess, Joyce versus Takam in a final eliminator, because, since he's the number one contender or whatever he is, or number two contender, and Usyk stepping up to fight AJ, then yeah, I guess this must be a final eliminator to decide the mandatory challenger. Now, Joyce has been fast-tracked in his career, as he had to be, because of his age, but also because of his experience. A guy who is as experienced as he is can be fast-tracked, especially since he was in the WSB, because the WSB is a nice bridge. It's a nice halfway house between amateur boxing and professional boxing. So, yeah, he's been fast-tracked. He's had some nice wins so far in his career. How many fights has he had now? Is it like 11 fights, 12 fights? I forget. Now fighting Carlos Takam, which is an interesting one. I think most of us expect Joe Joyce to win, but there could be, some questions asked of him in this fight. If he gets past it, becomes mandatory, I can't imagine he's going to get that WBO shot anytime soon. The WBO, like the WBC and WBA, seem to enforce their mandatories in a random fashion. Some guys get their mandatories very quickly. Other guys have to wait months and months, sometimes even years, to get their mandatory shots. There really isn't any rhyme and reason. It appears as though the sanctioning bodies make the rules up as they go along. Whereas with the IBF, they are the lone sanctioning body which usually enforces their mandatories quite strictly. Famously, of course, they stripped Tyson Fury very shortly after he fought Vladimir Klitschko because of the fact he had a rematch scheduled against Klitschko, and he wasn't, and therefore wasn't able to face his mandatory, who I think at the time was Glasgow. So the belt was up in the air, and Glasgow fought Charles Martin, right? It was Glasgow, wasn't it? It wasn't some other guy. I'm sure it was Glasgow. So yeah, the IBF tend to be very strict, and that's something I like. But with the WBO and the other sanctioning bodies, they'll often make you wait. But then again, here's the caveat I'll add to that, why this situation could be a bit different. Frank Warren, as I mentioned earlier, has got a very close relationship with the WBO, and he has had from the very start of that organization's existence. In fact, that organization, I think Frank Warren might have said this in the past, that organization probably owes a lot to Frank Warren in terms of credit for helping them grow and become a legitimate, or widely recognized as a legitimate sanctioning body. They probably owe him a big, I don't know what, pat on the back or something, right? For helping them out in the way that he did. But of course they helped him out because he had loads of fighters back in the 1990s who, let's face it, probably wouldn't have been good enough to win a world title with the IBF, the WBC, the WBA. So the WBO at the time was more like the IBO is in this day and age. So if you win an IBO world title, does that mean you're really a world champion? Because their top 10 is shaky. I mean, an example would be Reynold Quinlan. He was an IBO world champion who Chris Eubank beat. So that's kind of how the WBO was back in the days. And in the 90s, and I guess it's the same now for most casuals, but certainly back then, the average boxing fan, the average casual, they didn't know the difference between the WBO and the WBC and the WBA and the IBF. When they would see a Frank Warren poster from one of his shows and it says world title WBO world title. It's all made up nice. As far as they're concerned, that's legit. You know? So that's the way that the WBO helped Frank Warren. Because they allowed him to turn shows which otherwise wouldn't have had any titles on the line, or maybe a British or Commonwealth or European title. They allowed those fighters to fight for their WBO world title so Frank Warren can gain some extra promotion, basically, because, or some extra prestige. His shows can gain extra prestige, and that then attracts more fans to watch on television and also to buy tickets. So it was a mutually beneficial relationship, let's be fair. So in this instance, can Frank Warren get Joe Joyce's mandatory shot if he beats Takam expedited, where he gets it more quickly than perhaps he would have if he was with a different promoter? I hope so, for Joe Joyce's sake, because he doesn't have time on his hands. But at the same time, I do wonder about the relationship Joe has with Frank Warren, because even now, whenever I hear Frank Warren talk about Joe Joyce, he doesn't seem to talk about him very enthusiastically. It's almost as if he says the bare minimum about Joe in terms of, oh yeah, he's a good fighter and we'll need to push on and this, that, and the other. He doesn't promote him enthusiastically to me. I don't know why that is. Have they had some type of misunderstanding? Or is it Sam Jones? Maybe he isn't happy about the fact that Sam Jones controls, let me not use the word controls, but he handles Joe's affairs and Frank doesn't have that much input. Is that why he's a little, standoffish with the Joyce team? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. But I still noticed that with Frank Warren, he doesn't seem to really have the enthusiasm for Joe Joyce that he has for people like Daniel Dubois and so on. So is that indicative of the fact or the possibility that Frank Warren, despite having this close relationship with the WBO, still might not push for Joe Joyce's mandatory shot if he beats Takam to be expedited? I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below about this whole